let's talk about Bama. A Bama is a Mizbeach that's built outside the boundaries of the Beis Hamikdosh. And there were certain stages in history that it was mutter, when the Jewish people came into Eretz Yisrael, when the Mishkan was put up in various different places. But at some stage, it was all over, and you only could bring it in the Beis Hamikdosh. Now, the laws of Bama actually were discussed in last week's parsha. So what's the connection to Shoftim? The connection to Shoftim is a piece of Gemara that says, on the words, Navi mikirbecha, a prophet from amongst you I will give. It continues, it's like a pasuk or two later, after Tamim Ti Hashem Alekecha, which was the previous Sikha. The pasuk says, I will give you a prophet, Elaf Tishmon, you should listen to him. What's Elaf Tishmon? Says the Gemara, even if he tells you to transgress one of the mitzvahs of the Torah, for example, Eliyahu Nahar Carmel, if it's done temporarily. The Sifri says, on last week's parsha, he learns it from the words, Hishamar lecha pentale lesecha, be careful, don't bring any karbanis, b'chol makom asher tira, anywhere you see. He says, but you could bring it where the Navi sees. If the Navi sees it, that's the right time, you could do it. So the Sifri and the Gemara bring it from two different sources. Interesting, the Sifri is written about the same time. It was written by Tanaim. Most of the Midrashim were. Now, the question that the Rebbe starts with, why do you need a special limud? Why do you need a special learning that the Bama is allowed? According to the Sifri, why do you need a special learning that the Bama is allowed? Why did the Torah have to tell us? We could just learn from this week's Parsha, Elaf Tishmon, listen whatever the Navi says. So the rugged shaver, the Rebbe brings an interesting rugged shaver. And it's important to just understand the context of the rugged shaver is not on the Bavli, not on the Gemara, not on the Sifri. He's rather on a Yerushalmi and Maseches Megillah. And the Yerushalmi and Maseches Megillah says that Ein habama niteres ela benavi. It's a law in Bama that a Bama can never be permitted, once it becomes prohibited, only through a Navi. But it's a law within the Bama. And he brings from Amar Rav Shimloi, in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Shimloi Debura, who says, Hashem, b'dvar chasisi, I followed your words. I did exactly what you want. In other words, the halacha is that a Navi can bring, even in the time of the Beis Hamikdosh, on a Bama, he has no issue, there's no prohibition of the fact that he sacrificed it under the Beis Hamikdosh. In other words, the Navi removes the prohibition of sacrificing on a Bama and allows it to work. Comes the Rebbe and sits there saying, you must say that the Sifri and the Bavli agree with this as well. Why? And the Rebbe says, in general, you try not to make too many arguments between the Sifri, between Bavli and Yerushalmi, even if you have to squeeze the bit. So the Rebbe says, based on this, the Bavli and everybody agrees that this idea that the Navi has incredible power, it's a law in the Navi, that the Navi can remove the law, the prohibition of Bama. Now, it's a law in Bama. What do I mean it's a law in Bama? In other words, it has to be specifically said at Bama, because literally the Navi comes and he's not overriding, he's rather initiating a plug in the system that was always there. There was always a caveat in the laws of Bama. You cannot do it unless a Navi says you can. So, to summarize, after a few minutes on this point, because now we're going to move to the Siyum on the Maseches Zvachim. To summarize, what the Rebbe proves over here is that the Bama is technically allowed if a Navi tells you. It's not allowed and the Navi comes and overrides it. There's a law in Bama, there's an exit, there's a caveat, there's a way to get out if a Navi tells you. And based on that, the Rebbe is going to explain a fundamental question. This sikha was said on Chafav. It was a siyum for the Rebbe had made on the Masechta in honor of his father's yahrzeit. Now, the whole last parak of Zvachim, It's interesting. All the Mishnahs of the last parak are stuffed into one long Mishnah at the beginning of the Masech, at the beginning of the parak in Gemara, and it unpacks it. And the whole of it, or pretty much the most of it, talks about Bamais. Now, the question that the Rebbe asks on Bamais is, why in the world is the Gemara discussing it? Ultimately, we know that Talmud Bavli does not discuss stuff that aren't relevant. That's why there's no Talmud Bavli on pretty much the entire Zerayim, besides Brachas, because it was written in Bavel, and all the laws of Meiser, Trum, and all that stuff weren't applicable. Now, truth is that even then the Bavli would write it, because it's possible that when Mashiach comes, we're gonna go back to it. But Bamais are a once-off thing, seemingly, that will never go back to the way it was. You'll never be able to bring the Bama again. So why would the Bavli be discussing it? Why would the Gemara discuss something that's impossible to happen? That means even situations, for example, we learned in Parshas for Ir Anidachas, a city that gets destroyed because all of the people, or majority of the people, were Avodah Zarah. It's never happened, but it could still happen. And technically, if it happened, if you could enforce it, you would do it. But this will never happen again. You'll never be able to bring a Bama. So why is it relevant? It's something only in the past. And based on what we said till now, we said at the beginning, based on the Rugged Shavar, the Yerushalmi, that it's a law in Bama, that a Navi could override it, technically now it could happen. Because every single day that the Bama is prohibited, it's only prohibited because a Navi didn't permit it. Now, maybe it will happen that a Navi will never do it. But technically, if somebody came in as a Navi, they would be able to do it. They would be able to not only override, but they're able to use the exit strategy within the laws of Bama, that a Navi can do it. As the Sifri pointed out in last week's Parsha. Now, interesting. But a Navi is never going to happen again, right? So seemingly it's a side issue in the Sikha, but the Rebbe gives it quite an amount of attention. If a prophet will never exist again, then it is irrelevant. The Rebbe says, interesting point in general, because it's one of those arguments you often hear people say, there can never be a prophet again. Even though the Rebbe says in Shoftim and Aleph that there is a prophet, and the prophet says, Hini Mashiach ba. But seemingly, the simple reading of the text is there's no prophecy. Comes the Rebbe and says, no. There could be a Navi. It's just not as much as it used to be. When the Torah says, Nistalka Ruach HaKodesh Mi-Yisrael in the Gemara, it doesn't mean there'll never be a Navi. But rather it means that it's not as rampant, and it's something that's not just going to come, but rather you really have to earn it. The Rebbe says the word is nistalik, but it doesn't say batal, it doesn't say removed. As if there's somebody that's shaykh, if somebody is appropriate to receive it, they could get it. But it's not as if it's no more. Hashem made a cutoff, there's no longer prophecy. But rather it's waiting. If somebody's right, they'll get it. And that's why the Rebbe said, the Rebbe explains, the fact that the Rambam says a lot of things about Nevuah, we learned that recently in Sefer Mada, he never says that there's no Nevuah from after the last prophets, Chagei, Schayar, Malachi. There's no hint to it. Rather, he says, if somebody follows the conditions of getting prophecy, whatever, exiting the worldly matters, going to a certain level of holiness, miyad Ruach HaKodesh right away, Ruach HaKodesh is going to come. In other words, no conditions, it was never locked out. And the Rebbe says, especially in Igeres Teman, it's one of the famous letters that the Rambam wrote, as Igeres Hashmad, Igeres Teman, etc., to the Yemenite Jews. And he writes the following, that, interesting, I'll try to read it almost in the text, because it's a fascinating idea. That when Bilam says, one of the blessings that Bilam gives is there will come a time that will say to the Yaakov and Yisrael what Hashem has done. So says the Rambam, Shemina Esahi, from that time with Bilam, Yesh Lachshev, you should count Keminyan Shayish, you should count the amount of Shayish, Misheshis Mebreshis, Va'ad Esa Es, Metachsa Nevuah Yisrael, there will come a time that the Nevuah will come back to the Jewish people. When was this Nevuah said? 40 years after the exit of Mitzrayim. So and that was in the year 2488. You'll see that was the year 2488. That's Tapach, yeah. And according to what I just told you, the Nevuah is going to come back to the Jewish people 2,000 years later, in the year 4,977 to Yitzira, which is pretty much the exact double. Ka'es, in other words, he's saying double this, 2488. Double is 4976. The Nevuah will come back. Tachzar Nevuah, not only a possibility, it will come back. And the Rambam talks over there in Igeres Taman, he says there was a certain individual who lived close to their time, who gave certain prophecies, and they were all kept, because a prophet has to make sure everything's kept. If even one detail is wrong in a Navi Yisrael, it's a problem. They have to tell you the future, and it has to be exact. And he says there was a Navi be'ein safek, there was a Navi without safek. So in other words, anytime, based back to the point, anytime a Navi could come and be matur Bama. So therefore it's important to know the laws of Bama. So the Rebbe again repeats this point that I said it earlier, but I'm just going to follow it the way the Rebbe follows now, that according to the Ragged Shavar, who explained in the Yerushalmi, that it's a law in Bama, not in a Navi overriding. Therefore, it's applicable forever. If it was a law in the Navi overriding, then technically the laws of Bama is irrelevant, because it's just whatever the Navi is going to override. And that's who said we're going to have a Navi and who said they're going to override. But over here we're saying the Bama specifically, from all the mitzvahs of Torah, has a specific thing that needs it. And even though it's very, very possible, very impossible, in other words, hard to fetch, but says the Rebbe, uses the example, the Aryeh reveal, all of this is a lion sitting on it. In other words, it's not like the issue with a prophet, will a prophet come, etc. So it's a law in prophecy, and if the prophet comes, will he decide to override Bama? No. The Bama every single day till today is sitting with a lion that just all the Navi has to do is remove it. The caveat is always there, the exit is always there. Says the Rebbe. So there are two elements in sacrificing on a Bama according to a Navi, based on the Sifri and based on the Gemara, etc. We learned it from two places. We learned it from a law in Nevuah, and we also learned it from a law in Bama. So there's two times that the Torah almost gives you the same exits. When we talk about Bama, obviously. When we talk about Navi, what example do we bring? The Bama example. Says the Rebbe, so it must mean that when you sacrifice on a Bama through a Navi, it has an incredible level, even higher than any other time when people were permitted to do by Bamas. Why? Because in general, even in the times that Yidden were able to use a Bama, it was only for Karban Rishus, only for something that I volunteer, not a Karban Chayva, something that I'm obligated. However, when you do it according to the Navi, it's a Karban Chayva. In other words, if you take not only the Yerushalmi, who says it's a law in Bama, but you also take the Bavli and the Sifri, who say it's a law in the person, that, remember, because they're learning, sorry, not the Sifri, the Bavli, who learns it from a Lav Tishmon, learns it from a law in the Navi. So, in other words, the Navi, a Lav Tishmon, when I listen to the Navi, he's not only overriding the Bama, he's overriding me. He's allowing me to elevate myself. In other words, I'm a part of it because I have to listen to him. It's not just the law in Bama, him and the Navi. There's a part that Elav Tishmon, I have to listen to him, and then I become, because I'm listening to him and I'm following the Torah, I'm doing a Karban Chayva. So I'm upgrading my standard. And it says the Rebbe, this is similar to the difference between sacrificing an Bama to sacrificing the Beis Hamikdosh. When you sacrifice an Abama, there's no holiness that stays over there. It doesn't expand anywhere. However, the Mizbeach, it accomplished Kedusha. So too says the Rebbe, you could say when you follow a Navi and you sacrifice an Abama, it has a bigger impact because it's not just a law in Bama, it's a law on the person, so it impacts me. So based on all this, why is the Gemara in Zevachim spending pretty much the whole last parak talking about Bama? Says the Rebbe, massive chiddush in the whole sugya. The relevance of it is because it's Bama al pi Navi. It's a Bama when a Navi tells you could do it. Says the Rebbe, based on that, we could also understand the connection to the beginning of the Masechta. The beginning of the Masechta Zvachim talks about any carbon that was sacrificed without intention, shalei lishman, is kosher, but you didn't accomplish the obligation. In other words, it's a kosher carbon, but it didn't accomplish what it set out to do as a carbon chayva, but rather it's a carbon shlamim, whatever. In other words, that an unintentional carbon does not remove me from my obligation to bring the carbon. And he finishes off the Masechta, however, if I listen to a Navi, then he will accomplish it with the that I could do my chayva. Says the Rebbe, the power that we just learned about bringing a carbon in the Beis Hamikdosh, and that Bama al pi Navi is so similar to it. You could see it in the similar to the Beis to Shul. How relevant. That you daven, tefillas come to remind us of the carbon, and you learn. And that is constantly. So what do I do when I daven and I learn? I bring the Kedusha into it in a way that it stays not only in the shul, but in me as well. In other words, there's a lesson over here, l'ch'ura. The Rebbe doesn't say go, he says l'ch'ura, but the Rebbe is l'ch'ura. That means seemingly it's good to do, if you're doing a mitzvah, dafka do it in a shul rather than do it in another place, because over here, you're taking a place that already is holy and you're adding holiness. And in other words, it's expanding into you and expanding into the shul. And when we expand the Kedusha of the Mikdash Mat in this world, we'll come to the Beis Hamikdosh of Shlishi, we'll receive the Kedusha from it, through the fact that we'll bring Karbanis, and says the Rebbe, because there'll be no longer Tumah, so we'll obviously no longer be distraction. So we'll do everything with intention, and we'll do it k'mitzvahs v'tzeinecha, and we'll be able to bring the holiness of the carbon even on the people, and they'll go level on level as they get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. May it be taken from Yad Mamash now.